When I was 14 years old, I was living in the heart of San Fernando Valley with my parents and my younger brother, 13 years old. We lived in a typical 3-bedroom tract home in the picture of suburbia. My parents decided to put the house up for sale and move to a bigger house, and that's when all hell broke loose. There's a space room attached to the garage that used to be painted all these psychedelic colors and bizarre symbols that we covered up with white paint. Soon after the house was listed on the market, we had some rain and my father noticed the ceiling in the shed was sagging from water damage, exposing the wooden beams underneath, so we tore it down. Strangely enough, lodged among the beams, we discovered a pair of binoculars, some commemorative coins from Apollo space mission, and a cheap watch. Nothing of any particular value, except perhaps sentimental. But all of us felt a collective chill go down our spines as we wondered who these items belonged to, how they managed to get above the ceiling, and why anyone thought they were worth hiding. Soon after, my mom received her monthly bank statement in the mail and noticed a couple of checks that were not written by her, but someone had signed her name. Puzzled, she picked us up from school and asked us about it on the way home, but neither of us would ever forge a check, so she went to retrieve the check to show us, but both of them were missing from the stack. Pretty soon, all of our personal items began to disappear and reappear in the oddest places. At first we thought someone was playing a practical joke, or that one of us was responsible, and the accusations began to fly. But some of the events that took place were so mind-boggling, we became sure that no person could be responsible. One antidote. My mom and I came home after grocery shopping, and as we were unpacking the groceries, we discovered that a whole bunch of non-food items had disappeared, even though we specifically saw the checker bag them. By this time, we were used to this, and figured that these things would reappear in the middle of the night in the oven or under the bed. My parents then went out to run errands for a couple of hours, and I settled myself to a long gab with my girlfriend. As I chattered, I idly opened and closed one of my desk drawers. It was completely empty, but when I closed it and opened it a second time, I saw a bottle of shampoo lying inside, the same bottle of shampoo that was missing from our groceries. I told my girlfriend what was going on and closed the drawer after removing the shampoo, bracing myself. I opened it again, and this time there was a tube of toothpaste. Astounded, I tore out the other 2 drawers and peered below the drawer, looking for any explanation of this phenomenon. Even stranger, my top drawer is a lockable drawer, so since it's closed, it's completely inaccessible from behind the desk or below. Wanting a witness to verify that I wasn't hallucinating, I called my brother in, and without explaining anything, I showed him the empty drawer and closed it. I opened it, and inside rested a 6-pack of Ivory soap. He freaked out and ran screaming out of the room. At this point, I was too excited to be frightened, so I continued to open and close the drawer, and sure enough, each time a new item appeared, sometimes 2. I even requested some specific items, like my nail polish or hair gel, to materialize, and it did. After every single missing item was retrieved, I stared at them all lining up in my desk in excited wonder, and then the awareness of what just happened hit me. I began to wonder if this thing, ghost, or whatever it is, can dematerialize and teletransport these items. There's no telling what else or who else it could be doing the same to next. Gathering up my hard-won toiletries, I joined my terrified brother on the front doorstep and waited for my parents to arrive. My girlfriend came running down the street to keep me company as well. This is just one of the many bizarre, implausible yet true events that my family and I have come to live with for the next 5 years. Certain things like cash were always missing no matter how closely you kept it against your body or how carefully you hid it. Important documents, term papers, school books always managed to disappear when you needed them most. This ghost was clearly present and knew what was most important to you and most inconvenient to steal. No matter how many times we moved, this presence made our lives miserable, but with each passing year, as my brother and I got older, the activity slowed down. By the time I left for college, there were only 2 incidents I can recall, and now that I'm married and 27 years old, nobody in my family has been affected. I could fill a book with all the things that happened, but if anybody out there can offer an explanation for a kleptomaniac ghost or has any similar experiences, I'd love to hear from you. Oh yeah, I've never heard or seen any physical manifestations other than things disappearing when I was looking the other way. Thanks for reading. So I'm sure you heard of the great witch city Salem, Massachusetts. If not, let me enlighten you. The witch trials of the late 1600s took place in Salem, Massachusetts, in part of what is now known as Danvers, Massachusetts. Due to the colorful history and the presence of many new age types, Wiccans, warlocks, etc., Salem has an abundance of strange and frightening stories to share. Here's one that I personally was involved in that took place in the summer of 2002 when I was 19 years old. One of the oldest cemeteries in Massachusetts and Salem's first cemetery, Old Burial Hill, is a tourist hub during the early fall months, but during late summer, it is empty except for passerbys and local kids, like ourselves. My best friend, her brother, their cousin and I had spent the day riding our bikes around, shoplifting, smoking cigarettes, and generally being a nuisance to the Bay State. We decided to cop a few 40 ounce and called it evening in the back of the graveyard. We had enough booze to give us a nice silly feeling, but not enough to cause visual hallucinations. There was no Navy rum involved in that evening, and none of us smoked pot. That was hippie crap. Dusk turned to dark, and we were cracking jokes, wrestling, and planning where to get more beer, when suddenly, the mood changed. Chris, my best friend's brother, began to tell us about a ghost that supposedly haunted the graveyard, and how his friend's sister, cousin, or someone like that had seen it last April. We were all spooked but didn't show it. Instead, we called his reliable source a wuss. Chris got annoyed and stormed off to take a leak. Me and Bianca and her cousin sat in silence, listening to Chris shuffle around. Suddenly, Chris came bolting from the corner of the graveyard. He jumped practically on top of us and sputtered out what was wrong. Jesus Christ, there's a dude, a frickin' dude. Yeah, so? Bianca scoffed. There are lots of dudes in Salem. No, in the tree, like hanging. Chris was visibly shaken and not generally an easily scared guy. Bianca looked at me and Andrew looked at Bianca and I looked at Chris. What? Chris began to crawl towards the tree he claimed the man was hanging in and mentioned for us to follow. I don't know why he had to crawl, but we all followed suit. From where we sat, the tree was not really visible because a building was directly behind it, Roosevelt's Pub and Grill. Chris led us to the spot he had gone to relieve himself, and from this angle, the tree was silhouetted against the purplish sky above the harbor. It took me a second to register what I was seeing. There was something on the largest bottom branch swinging. The tree was huge and very old, and by itself scary, but now, sure enough, a figure swung very slightly. I didn't think it was a ghost, and turned to Bianca, who at this point, like her cousin, was frozen terrified with a free hand covering her mouth. Should we call the police? I hissed. Chris answered for her. We don't need the damn police for this man. And something told me he was right, and something told me we should definitely leave. None of us spoke, but we all booked it at once, ran to the iron gate, and went straight to Chris's and Bianca's house, dropping off the shocked and very silent Andrew at his house down the street. We didn't really talk about it for the rest of the night. Instead, we played Uno and crashed in front of the TV. The next day, we went back for our bikes and belongings we had ditched in fear the night before. Andrew's half 40 ounce was gone, and so was Bianca's bike. Gotta love the locals. The paper said nothing of a body. The graveyard was not the site of the witch hangings, and from what I have found out from asking around town, there's never been a reported suicide or hanging in that graveyard. The only known hanging site was Gallows Hill, where the innocent were hung during the trials. Gallows Hill is another whole story for another time, but until then, come visit the quaint and creepy town of Salem, Massachusetts for history and some spooks later. My wife used to work for Oxford Suites in Hayden Island, just off of I-5. She had a complimentary stay as a new employee, so she thought it would be nice to let our son spend the night with Grandma, and we would have a nice night together alone. About 6 a.m., I was sleeping on my left side facing the alarm clock, and had a ringing sensation in my right ear that slowly turned into the whispered words, "Die, die, die." I couldn't move, and it was all I could do to even open my eyes. Finally, I was able to shake off this strange or bound feeling, and it stopped instantly. The experience only lasted a few seconds, but it was totally unnerving. I've had other experiences like this. I just learned from this website that it is called Old Hack. I never even knew anyone else who has experienced this. I was 22 years old at the time in 1997. I'm now almost 31. Thank you. Back in the summer of 1994, my family and 2 other families attended a dance competition in Santa Cruz, California. We rented a suite at a local hotel. The suite had one huge upstairs bedroom with a big jacuzzi tub. The downstairs had a living room and a kitchen. It had a large red iron stairway that led up to the bedroom. Together, with the other families, we had 6 children with us. 5 of the children were age 8 and 9, and my daughter was the youngest, age 4. From the minute I walked upstairs, a weird feeling came over me, a feeling of uneasiness. The children claimed the large bedroom upstairs as theirs, and they played up there the whole night. For many hours I stayed in the upstairs room with the children. I felt uncomfortable leaving my 4-year-old daughter up there because of this uneasy feeling I had, a feeling I could not explain. My husbands and friends told me I was being foolish and talked me into coming down and joining them. Several hours went by, and the children all had fallen asleep. There were 3 of us adults left awake, and we sat on the living room floor talking. We then heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They were extremely loud, and there was no doubt that one of the children had woken up and was coming downstairs. All 3 of us turned to see who it was. In the middle of the staircase stood a small girl, the same exact size as my daughter. I called to her by my daughter's name and asked her if she was okay, or if something was wrong. I then asked her if she had a bad dream. She didn't answer me as I said her name again, my daughter's name, and she disappeared. My friend and I both looked at each other in disbelief. We both saw the same thing. The 3rd adult heard the footsteps, but didn't pay attention after that. My friend and I both discovered her exactly the same way. A small girl with long curly hair, wearing an old-fashioned white nightgown. She was turned to the side where you could only see her profile, but you could see the sadness on her face. She was white or transparent in color. The time I was talking to her, I did not even realize that she was a ghost. She seemed so real, but as soon as she disappeared, I could not understand how I did not know she was a ghost while I was talking to her, because being white and transparent, she obviously did not look like a real person. It was a very scary, overwhelming feeling. I quickly woke up my husband and had him check the children. They were all sound asleep. I crawled deep into my sleeping bag, scared to death, and eventually fell asleep. The next day, I contacted the hotel to see if anyone had ever reported a ghost. The worker said he was new and didn't know anything, but he said that Santa Cruz is believed to have many ghosts. I've always been hesitant when telling this story because nobody truly believes me except my friend who also saw it. Most people just kind of laugh or respond with or wow. I've always believed in spirits, but never believed you could actually see them. Well, I'm a true believer now and will never forget this experience. I started doing paranormal investigating about 2.5 years ago and have had tremendous success thus far. I've always been interested in all paranormal avenues, but I never thought I'd be doing this one day. My 7th cemetery outing turned out to be one that I'll never forget. I went out to Forest Home Cemetery in my city of Fitfield, Wisconsin. It goes back to around 1850-ish and is centered in a wooded area, which makes it kind of intimidating to venture into at night. But being the persistent risk taker, I went anyway. I ended up bringing a good friend of mine along, just in case. We started out exploring the front of the cemetery and kind of copped a feel for our surroundings, making sure we are aware of the obstacles in our way, gravestones. After that, we headed out towards the middle of the cemetery, armed with only a camera and a flashlight. Though nothing happened yet, we were pretty nervous anyway. So we went over the entire cemetery taking pictures and hoping to see something strange. We didn't see anything strange that night, but something did happen that scared the hell out of us anyway. I was ready to call it quits for the night, but there was one more area we hadn't quite covered. Now, in this particular cemetery, I don't like going in the very back, not even during the daytime. It just gives me a strange, unwelcome feeling. But that night, for some reason, I thought it would be worth it. In retrospect, I wasn't sorry I did. Back to my friend that I brought with me. He asked if we should leave, and I said I thought we should check out the back of the cemetery before we go, and he agreed. So you can understand what we experienced, I'll try and describe what the back looks like. The cemetery itself is pretty big for a small town. There's probably around 1,000 people buried there, and it's set in the woods, as I mentioned before. In the very back there's a road, and on the other side of the road is a huge field. At about 100 to 150 feet into the field starts the tree line. So you would have the field to your left and the road and the cemetery to your right, with the last row of stones right next to it, the road. As we made our way onto the road and walked down, maybe about 5 to 10 feet, all of a sudden, and I still can't fully explain it, there was a very loud growl that seemed to reverberate all around us. I must have jumped at least 3 feet into the air because I literally landed on my friend and just about knocked the flashlight out of his hand. Chris, my friend, had a total shock on his face as he studied the flashlight beam towards where the sound came from, and there was not a single thing, animal, or person to be seen, just eerie silence. We were stunned and dumbfounded. I managed to stammer out what the hell was that. Chris said he had no idea, but thought we better leave. We both wasted no time in leaving, but upon leaving, both of us were experiencing a tight feeling in our chests, and we both had trouble breathing. It was like being in a bear hug or something, very strange. Also, just before we left, after we had gotten back to the car, we took a tiny rest and gathered our thoughts. Chris had lit a cigarette, which technically is a no-no while ghost hunting, but we could really care less at that point. He took about 3 or 4 puffs of it and then threw it on the gravel road. For whatever reason, we both watched the cigarette fall to the ground, and as it hit, it started spinning and then abruptly stopped. Then, as if flipping off a light switch, the orange burning tip died out. We left that night with a lot to think about, and since then, I've gotten numerous pictures and EVPs from that cemetery and others as well. I'm not as scared of ghosts as I once was, and I consider them to be just like us, only a little different, obviously. I can't wait until summer gets here, and I can go back to doing what I love, hunting ghosts. Okay, this is kind of a long story. It happened when I was on vacation from Chicago, visiting my cousins in California. My cousins have a huge backyard and have a basketball court in it. They also have a tree house that is complete with electricity, TV, and a PlayStation. So me and one of my cousins named Danny were playing basketball. It was late, and it was beginning to get dark outside. But while we were playing, Danny's brother, Mike, was in the treehouse playing PlayStation. After we balled it up for a while, we heard Mike screaming at us through the treehouse window saying, "Damn it guys, stop shaking the fort." We simply looked at him in confusion because we were at least 30 yards away from him and didn't even touch the legs of the fort. We just continued our game until it became too dark to see. We noticed that Mike had left the fort, so we went in to play some video games. We played a game until we started to feel some shaking. We yelled at whoever was pushing it to stop. It instantly stopped and we continued. About 5 minutes later, it began shaking again. I went out with a flashlight and looked under and around, but saw nothing. I looked to the direction of the house, which was far because their backyard is so big, and saw that Mike and the rest of the family were in the living room. Kinda freaked, I climbed back up the ladder into the fort. We started playing a board game when we saw that the fort's security light went on, which meant that something was near. We briefly froze, staring at each other and both noticing the fear in each other's eyes. Danny went and peeked through the window but saw nothing, even with the help of the security light. I told him that it was probably some animal. He responded by telling me that the light only detects larger things, such as people. I told him to stop worrying, and we got back to our game. After a while, we got bored and decided to go back to his house. Danny got up and tried to open the door. It didn't even budge. "The stupid thing is jammed again," he said, as he pulled out a belt from behind the door. He must have had this problem before because he had a method of solving the problem. He wrapped the belt around the doorknob and began to pull as hard as he could. He looked so confused and frustrated and told me that it should be opening easily. I helped pull it, but still, it didn't even budge. It was as if someone was holding it from the outside. Sounds crazy, right? But it was then that we heard steps, as if someone was walking around the little porch of the fort. We both looked at each other and nearly broke down with fear. The first thing Danny did was pull out some powerful BB guns he had hidden under his bed. He then opened up a table for us to hide under. We were freaking out. Then I summoned the courage to peek out the window, and when I did, I saw nothing, but the steps continued, this time up and down the ladder of the fort. I nearly screamed. But being the optimistic and fun-loving guy that I am, I took advantage of the situation to scare Danny and joke around. I kept peeking out the window and screaming as if I saw nothing, just to freak Danny out. But then, he retaliated. He grabbed the string hanging down from the window curtains and tugged them as hard as he could, causing the curtains to go up, shooting up and exposing the whole window. We both sat under the table in fear, thinking of what to do. After a few minutes, the security light went on again. We sat in silence, watching the light that reflected through the window and onto the wall of the fort. That's when we heard footsteps coming up the ladder again. We drew our guns, thinking they could do something, and continued watching the light. A few seconds later, for a brief moment, a shadow passed through the light, sending a terrifying chill through our spines. We looked at each other blankly for seconds until I spoke, telling Danny that we have to get out of here. I slowly reached out from under the table and grabbed the string to close the curtains. Once I did, we got up and cleaned everything up so we could be ready to run like hell out the door. But the door still wouldn't open. I knew for sure that something was preventing us from opening it. I then got annoyed and my anger took over my fear. I began pounding on the door, screaming cuss words and saying, "Let us out." After my tantrum of screaming and swearing, the door simply slid open with a single pull. We ran out, shut the door, jumped down, and ran like madmen towards the house. It was later that night that my uncle, Danny's father, told us that the fort was built upon an ancient Indian burial ground. I knew whatever happened that night was for real. So that morning, once it was light out, we managed to force ourselves back into the fort. We began discussing whatever went on that night, and our paranoia caused us to keep looking out the little holes in the curtains. But when I looked, I saw nothing. I can't really explain what it was. It looked like a dark figure, or an orb, but it had the physical structure of a person, arms, legs, and hand. It was crouched down behind a skinny tree. I shot my head back and told him to look. He said he saw it, but then, when I looked again, it was gone. Whatever happened that night caused me to believe in supernatural spirits, and I will never forget it. Thanks for reading. This was around the summer of 1990. My best friend lived about 4 blocks away from where I lived, and I usually walked or rode my bike to his house when we hung out. We were pretty young and pretty wild, and we'd seen our fair share of weird stuff growing up. Long days and late nights of exploring the neighborhood and seeing what kind of trouble we could get into. Growing up in the city, there were some rough neighborhoods around, and I had a very specific route of back streets I took home each night. Still, I knew to always be on my guard and aware of my surroundings, just in case. One night, as I was walking home from my friend's house, I encountered something I could never have prepared for. It was well after midnight, probably closer to 2 a.m., when I was casually strolling down the middle of the street on my way home. There weren't really any cars on the road at that time, so I walked right down the center line of the street. As I said, even though it was quiet and I knew the neighborhood, I always kept my eyes and ears open for signs of trouble. Rival groups of kids who might want to claim the area as turf were always a concern. As I made my way down the road, I began to get the feeling that I wasn't alone. I resisted the urge to stop or even look around, choosing instead to keep walking at an even pace and listen for the sound of someone following me. Footsteps, clothes rustling, or breathing would give it away. I heard nothing, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being followed. I became more and more sure that someone was behind me, and my adrenaline started to build. I still resisted the urge to turn around and look back. If someone was following me looking for trouble, there was a good chance they would rush at me, and they would have the advantage. This was not my first rodeo, so I kept walking, but began bracing myself for a confrontation. Nothing happened. I turned a corner onto a new street and took a chance to quickly look over my shoulder. I was hoping to just see another random person out for a stroll, except there was no one behind me. Maybe they had gone into a house. I kept walking. Moments later, I felt it again. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my arms broke out in goosebumps. Someone was following me. I was absolutely sure of it, only now they were clearly trying to stay hidden. Every instinct I had, this was going to be a confrontation, and I braced myself for it. My fight or flight instincts were screaming as I continued walking, trying to appear calm. I felt it getting closer, and now, I thought I could hear movement in the distance behind me. Finally, I decided it was time to turn to confront my follower. I balled up my fist and quickly turned around, ready to act. Again, there was no one there. My eyes searched for signs of movement among the curbside trees and among the handful of cars parked along the street. Nothing moved around the cones of light being cast by the street lamps. Still, I knew someone or something was out there. I stood there for what seemed like forever, determined to wait out the hiding stalker. I couldn't believe they were staying hidden for so long without peeking out to see if I was still there. I thought to myself, what the hell is going on here? After another minute of watching and waiting, I began to wonder if I imagined the whole thing. I was about to turn around and keep walking towards home. Then suddenly, about 50 feet away, I caught the shape of someone running out from behind a car and darting behind a tree. Again, my adrenaline surged, and I was caught between wanting to run for it and being frozen with panic. I kept my eyes fixed on the tree that the shadow ran to, waiting for him to make another move. Nothing happened. The tight knot of apprehension in my stomach began to melt and was replaced with anger. Who the heck was this guy screwing around with me in the middle of the night? Without thinking, I yelled out, "I know you're there, you coward! Step out and face me!" From behind the tree, what I can only describe as a vaguely human-shaped mass leaned out from behind the tree. Apart from its outline, it had no defined features except for a pair of glowing red eyes that flashed in the dim light of the street lamp. "What the hell?" I yelled, stumbling back a step, not understanding what I was seeing. The dark form stepped fully out from the shadow and took a step towards me. I don't know what came over me, but all of a sudden, I felt more angry than I ever had in my life. It was crazy. I had this sudden urge to fight, and as I looked at those dull, glowing red eyes coming towards me, all I felt was anger. I wanted to tear it apart. Still within the dim light under the tree, the dark figure took one more shambling step towards me, and I was overcome with rage. Unbelievably, I stepped forward and yelled out, "Come on," challenging it to fight me. But instead of coming closer, the dark form reared up slightly, and I swear if it had a mouth, I knew that mouth would be grinning at me. And then it vanished. It was just gone. The feeling of rage, it was gone as well, faded away. I stood there for several more minutes trying to understand what had just happened. Slowly, I finally turned around and began walking towards home again. Only this time, there was no sense of being followed. Nothing weird happened at all for the rest of the journey. Night after night, I walked that same path home, always wondering if that red-eyed entity would return, wondering if I would be confronted and experience that same crazy rush of anger. But it never came back. I've never told anyone this story because, well, who would believe it? Thanks for listening. I have a strong interest in ghosts. Not that I always have, but I gained it recently. I'm a sheriff's deputy in Arizona. In a large city with a high crime rate, if you're a cop, then all of your friends are cops. I went to the police academy with a guy named Jeff. He was a short, stocky kid about my age. We were the only ones in the class who were the same age, so we bonded. We pushed each other through the academy. After we graduated, we were surprised to find that we would be working in the same district on the same shift for the same supervisor. We worked the late shift and always went to lunch with one another, usually around 11:30 p.m. We would go to my mother's house and eat. Jeff didn't trust cooks at fast food restaurants at 11:30 p.m., especially when they looked at us as if they had just gotten out of the state prison and were serving a cop. My mother worked at Walmart as a manager. She got off at work at 11 and was extremely delighted to have us every night. She lived in a rather bad area of the city. My mother and Jeff would laugh and joke. They would swap stories and try to convince each other that their job was worse than the other's job. Jeff would always let her win the argument. She called him her son. Jeff and myself went skiing every year in the mountains of Utah. It was a vacation that him and his father took every year, and he made it with me after his father passed. Jeff loved my mother so much that he invited her to Utah one year. As my mother was with an instructor learning to ski, Jeff looked at me and said, "Jerry, I can't take it anymore. The big city is draining the life out of me." Puzzled by this, I asked him what he was talking about, that he had loved his job and was the best cop in the valley at what he did. He explained that he was sick of seeing car accidents with dead bodies, chasing down a crack addict in the dark, getting shot at, etc. I said, "Fine, what are you gonna do, quit?" I was rather pissed off. He said, "No, just quit working there." I want to move to an area like this, cold, quiet, and comfortable. I yelled at him something very childish. "What about my mom? You'll kill her here. She loves you." He said, "Don't worry. I'll stop by from time to time to check on her." People just don't understand the strong connection that police officers get with their partners who watch their back every night. We returned from the trip, and Jeff did as he said he would. He packed everything up and moved to Colorado. Not long after I was transferred to day shift, I told my mother that Jeff had just transferred to the other side of the valley. It's what Jeff wanted. He couldn't stand me and my mother hounding him to stay. And with that, here's the story. Jeff died about 4 months after arriving in Colorado. Truly how every police officer would want, he saved a little boy that had fallen through the ice in a river. Shortly after retrieving the boy, the ice he was laying on gave way. I never told my mother. She was getting up there in years and would not have been able to stand losing her son. I received a call from my mother in the middle of the night, about 3 weeks after Jeff's funeral. She said, "Jerry, I want you to come over and spend the night. Jeff just ran off a burglar, but I'm still scared out of my mind." I was very confused and asked her to explain. She started the story. My mother was in her living room. She had just gotten off of work. Remember, it's after 11 p.m. She was watching TV and eating her dinner. From the other room, she heard the sound of metal grinding. She got up and went into her bedroom and seen that there was a man at the window with a screwdriver trying to get in. She ran back to the front room and picked up the phone to call 911. There was no dial tone. My mother said at that moment she just panicked. She had remembered that I had told her that burglars who break in to take things usually don't cut the phone line, but burglars who plan on hurting or killing someone do. She started to scream, "Help! Help! Help!" over and over. At that moment, she heard a loud crash and some thumping around. She heard a man's voice scream and then heard someone running away. She stood there, unable to move, not knowing what was going on outside. Bang, bang, bang from the door. Still, my mother didn't move. "Mrs. Smith!" She heard someone call her name from the outside. "Yes, who's there?" she yelled. "It's me, Jeff." She opened the door and seen Jeff standing in a blue uniform. Weird, because we wore brown and tan uniforms. "My God," she said, "thank God you're here. Did you get him?" "Nah, but he won't come back, I promise. Come inside and get something to eat. You look tired." "No, I need to get back." "Okay," she said, "but keep an eye on my house for me. I'm calling Jerry to come over." He said, "No, don't do that. I'll keep an eye out." I raced to my mother's house in a panic. I didn't know whether to be scared or mad at the burglar, or just that my mother had seen someone else. I got to my mother's house and ran in. She was still visibly shaken from the burglar. I sat down next to her. I grabbed her hands and placed them on my cheeks. I started to cry and told my mother, "Jeff is dead, Mom. He died over 3 months ago. I couldn't stand to tell you." She refused to hear of it. She explained that he was just here about an hour ago. I explained that Jeff did not want her to try and stop him from going to Colorado, so he had forced me to lie. I went on to explain that Jeff had promised me that he would look after her, and he was fulfilling that promise. My mother collapsed and laid on the couch all night crying. I found out that Jeff was in a blue uniform that night because he had been buried in a blue uniform, the color he wore in Colorado. My mother figured at the time he was working something like a special gang unit or something that night. I will never forget Jeff or what he did for my mother when he was alive and even after. It should show how much a promise is concrete in the heart of a respectable man. So every year when the time comes, when Jeff and his dad used to go on their ski trip, I go to his grave and I think about him. I thank him. I thank him for the times he had saved my life, times he saved strangers' lives, and the time he saved my mother's life. May God hold you in his arms. Thank you for reading. Whilst in the army, I've posted to many a place, but nothing like Hammersmith's barracks, Hartford, Germany. Originally a Nazi camp back in the Second World War, the camp has a lot of history to it. The buildings in the actual camp are actually like the ones in the film Buffalo Soldiers, just to give you some idea. I arrived there in September 2004 and thought nothing of the block at first glance, but one thing that would puzzle me was in the basement. There were still the old steel cell doors of when it was still occupied by Nazi Germany. What were such doors needed for? Anyway, as time went on, I started to find out some very interesting facts about the camp itself. Like one, for instance, was the cobblestones, which were very subsided. Why hadn't those been replaced? Well, the reason why was due to the fact that when occupied by the previous owners, they took it upon themselves to bury the dead underneath the road, then brick over the bodies. I kid you not. Anyway, that's just the inside of the history of the camp. There have been various sightings, and people have heard noises, which mostly occur at night. There used to be a small corridor situated on the second floor where the females lived, and in this time, they have reported on numerous occasions of seeing a young girl aged about 8 or 9. One girl states that she would sit on the end of her bed while she slept, and when she awoke, she would find a dark body-like shadow of a young girl with long hair watching her. There were also talks of this ghost when she returned to the UK. On leave for 2 weeks, the room was adjacent to hers, which at the time was occupied by 2 other females, when they started noticing that a dark shadow would enter the room during the nighttime, and things would be moved from one place to another. When the females were moved out of this block and males were moved into this corridor, all the strange things happening occurred stopped. I'm no expert on this matter, but I believe maybe the young girl felt a motherly love or connection to these females. I, on the other hand, was living at the opposite side of the block at the time, when I found myself awoken one night by a noise. When I was fully awake, there was total silence, and immediately thought to myself that I must have been dreaming. I got out of bed to go to the bathroom, which was only down the corridor from my room. Just before entering, I could hear a voice, which seemed as if it was talking to themselves in a foreign language. I entered thinking that maybe someone may have just had a little too much of a drink that night, and I found the bathroom deserted, and the lights were all switched off. I was shocked and turned the lights on immediately to find a dark shadow moving from one side of the room to the other. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen. Well, I'll tell you now, I did not use that bathroom that night. I decided to go on to a different floor. Shortly after that, I returned back to the UK, and so I did not have to undergo any more midnight hauntings. Thanks for reading. I've always believed in ghosts, witches, and the paranormal, etc. My grandma has always been involved with ghosts, and it seems that they always follow her. I now think that I have one following me. Anyways, to the story at hand. It was a few years ago. I was about 17, and I was having my best friend and my cousin over for the night. It was only us, my mom, and 2 younger sisters were visiting my aunt in another town. Well, that night we were in my room, and when the door is open, you can see the bathroom across the hallway. Also, with the way my bed is set up, you can see into the hallway when sitting there or lying there on my bed. My cousin Destiny got up to go potty. Sam and myself were lying on the bed watching a movie. I heard the bathroom door open, and I looked over, just as Destiny came running back into the room looking scared. Sam and I looked at each other puzzled, then asked what was wrong. Destiny said that when she had gone into the bathroom, she had leaned over the sink to start brushing her teeth after going potty and washing her hands, and when she stood back up, it felt like someone was behind her watching her in the mirror. I'm getting chills just thinking about that day. Well, Sam was like, yeah, right. She is not a big believer in ghosts, I don't think, and me, being a believer and wanting to help out, got up to go to the bathroom to show Destiny that she was just tripping and that there was nothing wrong. Destiny stayed in the bathroom and watched as I walked across the hall to the bathroom. Well, Right before I went to step over the threshold, I stopped, dead in my tracks, and for some reason my body froze and refused to go any further into the bathroom. I was a bit creeped out because I hadn't ever done that before. I hurried back to the room, and I was like, oh my. Sam was still skeptic, and she walked into the bathroom plain as day. I didn't get it. Destiny made Sam stay in there as she finished brushing her teeth, and I just stayed out of the bathroom the rest of the night. The next morning, everything was fine. I could walk into the bathroom no problem, and even Destiny could close the door when she went in there now. Later on that morning, though, I walked around the corner to get into the bathroom to take a shower, my clothes and towels in my arms. I stopped. It felt like my eyes bulged, and I couldn't get my breath at first. There, standing in front of the drawn shower curtain, drawn as in closed shower curtain, was a black outline of a man a couple of inches taller than me. I am 5'9". Well, I freaked out and I ran to the phone and called my grandma, who I figured would know what to do in this situation. She told me to go back to the bathroom, and I did, and the outline of the man was still there, standing right in front of the bathtub. My grandma then asked if all the doorways had been crossed with holy water. I said yes, because all of them had, including the windows. That is, until it came to my room. I'm not a Satanist or anything, but that's my shrine, my room, and I don't need holy water to protect me. So, only the outside of my room's door had been crossed. Well, my grandma then told me to start chanting these words. I don't remember what they were, but they made me feel at ease. Next thing I know, the black outline of the man starts to move, and it goes through the bathroom wall, right into my room. I was happy to have it out of the bathroom, but now it was in my room. What was I supposed to do? Well, it ended up that I didn't have a problem with it in my room. I didn't get the creepy crawly feeling, so I think that I either left my house through one of the walls in my room that hadn't been crossed with holy water, or maybe I was just stuck in the bathroom and was trying to get back to my room. I hadn't told my mom and sisters about the ghost. My baby sister was young, and I didn't want to scare her real bad. But ever since that incident in the bathroom where the ghost or whatever it was moved from the bathroom into my room, my two younger sisters always refused to be in my room alone. Weird. And that's my story about the ghost in the bathroom. Feel free to write me if you like. More stories to come. I have more, plus I have some that my dad, mom, uncle, and aunt and grandma have told me. All true. Thanks for reading. I grew up in an orphanage, having lost both my parents in a car accident when I was 6 years old. This paranormal encounter occurred in my third year of stay at this orphanage. I must describe, the orphanage was pretty dilapidated and had only 4 dormitories, one for girls, infant to 8 years old, for girls, 8 to 18 years old, and where I belonged, one for boys, and so on and so forth. This happened right at midnight when me and 2 of my friends went out of our dormitory to head to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. It was a very chilly night, I must recall, and the 3 of us wore nighties. After we gotten a drink, we hurried upstairs trying to avoid being caught by the caretaker. Just as we were about to enter our dormitory, me and Hannah, I can't really remember if that was her name, knows that Elizabeth was not with us. Out of nowhere, we saw her enter the boys' dorm in top speed. It was like seeing a curtain on a very fast horse. Out of curiosity, we peered into the boys' dorm and found Elizabeth jumping on an empty bed, as if it were a trampoline, while the boys were sound asleep. We called her, but received no answer. Then, in just a snap, she faded into nothing. At that, me and Hannah were scared out of our wits and ran to our dormitory. Once there, we covered ourselves with our sheets, shivering in fear. I can remember I think Hannah was actually crying and praying for the Lord's Prayer at the same time. That morning, when we were off to prepare for our classes, we saw Elizabeth, who was well and smiling. She even greeted us and sat with us in class. Me and Hannah just figured it was all a dream, but we were 9 back then. Now, I'm 30 years old, and I know surely it wasn't just a dream. I think it's what paranormal experts call an encounter with a doppelganger, and let me tell you, it was pretty horrifying. Other experiences I had in my 10-year-old stay at the orphanage was the spontaneous on and off activity of the lights in the classrooms, dormitories, libraries, dining halls, etc. Grown-ups talking as if they were having some conference in a flower garden outside at the back of the orphanage in the middle of the night, and the beautiful chorals singing of poems, which I believe came from the dining hall, that occurred in different times of the day. I strongly believe that the orphanage was haunted. But what gets me wondering up to now is that why the people in charge never did anything about it when some children, especially the adolescents, started complaining. Well, that's my story, and I hoped you liked it. I apologize for the length. Thank you for reading. The following story happened to me when I was 4 or 5 years old. This experience occurred during 1944 or 45 in Kissimmee, Florida. My mother and I were waiting by the side of the highway, Orange Blossom Trail, for my father and grandmother to drive us to Orlando. Back then, there was very little traffic on the trail as it was known. We watched as the black Ford approached from the south with the two of them inside. Neither person appeared to notice the old lady and small child waving at them. I saw both their faces through the windshield. The two people looked like my father and grandmother. Same clothing, etc. The car disappeared around the corner. We were both surprised that the car did not stop. My old lady, mother, started rambling and talking some very unkind comments about my father and grandmother. Several minutes later, another black Ford appeared from the south. This time the car slowed down and stopped, several feet ahead of us. It was my father and grandmother. We got into the car and asked them why they drove past us the first time. Their response was that they just got there. My father indicated that it must have been another couple that looked a lot like them. After a few minutes of arguing, my old lady just went blank and stopped talking about it. 12 years later, I asked my father if he remembered the incident. He still remembered the fuss my old lady made when she got into the car. He indicated that the kind of situation had happened to him before, more than once in Kissimmee during the 1940s. This kind of thing, being seen before arriving, appeared to run in the family. These are just some of the observations I noticed about the incident. This was my first experience at seeing something that would happen in the future. The car and people were clearly visible and solid. The people looked like my father and grandmother. I do not remember hearing the car, no engine sound. I do not remember seeing any smoke from the tailpipe either. The people in the car did not respond or react in any way to the two people that were waving at them from the side of the road. Back then, everyone would have waved back to us small children that waved to them. My old lady sometimes remembered the incident. Other times, she could not. After this incident, I've never trusted my ability to identify people by sight. Finally, this situation appears to be common to my father's side of the family. I've also been seen in places before I arrived too. Note, my relatives on both sides of my family are psychic, psychotic, crazy, and or a combination of the last three. I'm probably the only normal one in the family. I'm sorry if you had to hear this, but I had to tell you. Thank you so much for reading this story, and I hope you don't run into anything that I experienced too. A friend of mine is a veterinary technician and has worked in numerous vet clinics over the years. There was one place that was strange though. All the techs at this one clinic would have frightening dreams about being chased through the clinic by something at one time or another. My friend had told me this, and I asked if she ever had this dream, and she said no, not yet. I would often go with her when she had to take care of the animals over weekends or holidays and help out. One night, it was my turn. It was a clear dream, and everything appeared real. I found myself running through the clinic with the feeling that there was something behind me, just beyond my sight, and that this entity didn't want me there. I also think it enjoyed the chase, because I was somehow in its place or frame, or more closer to its existence where it could reach me. I was overwhelmed with fear, but I remember wondering why this was happening to me because I didn't work there. I remember stopping just before I got to the kennel room, turning around and yelling, "Hey, I don't work here." Suddenly, I was awake, like someone had flipped a switch, and I never had that dream again. This place had a higher number of deaths associated with surgeries than any other clinic my friend had worked at. They also had problems with some of their equipment turning on and off, batteries draining, tools missing, that sort of thing. Anyway, the owner sold the place, and now it's an eye clinic. I've often wondered if any of those people had strange dreams. Thanks for reading. This is a story related to me via my father. He told me yesterday, as we were speaking of ghosts. Dad said he was walking home one fall evening while he was in high school, in the late 1950s. He had been in downtown Portsmouth lollygagging around with some friends. It was now time to go home for dinner. If anyone is familiar with Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they know it is rich in history and an old port town, hence the name. There is an alley that cuts behind the school, and it passes by the South Mill Pond. He was halfway down the alley when he saw a bright light coming out of the sky. He had no idea what it was. This was back in the day where schools were building bomb shelters and kids were scared of some sort of disaster. The light got brighter and brighter. As it came closer to him, it was speaking to him. Dad listened to it and was mesmerized. He said it looked like an angel, but not anything like you would assume it to be. It spoke to him for quite some time. He doesn't recall how long he was there. The concept of time ceased to exist, and it left in the same manner as it came. He continued home and told his mother. She told him it must be his guardian angel. To this day, he can't remember what it said or what it really looked like. He had such a glimmer in his eye as he told me. He was smiling like he hadn't told me the whole story. In the years after that event, my father has cheated death at least 5 times, the last time being this past year. He should have died, but he didn't. I wonder if that angel guided him through all of the obstacles he has faced. If it did, I'm glad, and I do believe. Thanks for reading. One night, I was hanging out with my friends in an apartment in the small town I lived in. 3 people lived there, a married couple and one of their friends who was a young teenager. I would hang out and stay overnight there frequently, as there was not much to do in such a small town. This night was just like any other, or so it seemed at first. We were just hanging out, talking and laughing about whatever came up. Soon it was late, and the young girl decided to go to bed while the rest of us were going to stay up longer. She walked down the hallway and entered her bedroom and screamed. We immediately jumped up and ran to her bedroom. She was looking down at the floor with an expression of terror on her face. She was staring at a medium-sized porcelain angel that was lying broken in 3 pieces on the floor. She kept this angel on the top of her Bible on a nightstand. Both the Bible and angel were on the floor. A broken angel is nothing to scream in terror over, and at first I was confused, but she picked it up, and streaming from the eyes was what looked like fresh blood. Immediately, I assumed that she was pulling some prank on us. An angel crying tears of blood sounded so generic to me, so unimaginative, that I thought for sure she was trying to get some negative attention. I took the angel pieces from her and said, yeah, right. She swore that she had nothing to do with the broken angel and its tears of blood. I gave her a scrumptious look, then looked closely at the angel's face. The blood looked like fresh nail polish, and I still did not believe that she had nothing to do with it. Knowing that nail polish smells strongly of chemicals, I put my nose close to the angel's face and smelled it. I could not detect a familiar nail polish smell, but I was still very doubtful. I noticed that the blood was running perfectly from the base of the eye, that it followed the contour of the round eye, and that none appeared on the eye itself. It was then that I started to think twice about what was happening. I knew that this girl had not left my sight for at least an hour and a half before she entered her bedroom and promptly screamed. Knowing that applying nail polish in such a way that it would not get on the eye itself, and then to make it run down the face in such a short time, a matter of seconds, was nearly impossible. As I held the angel in my hands, I grilled the girl about what she had seen when she entered the room. She said that she walked in to see it broken and the blood just beginning to run. I asked her several times if she was faking us out, and that a joke like that would not be funny at all. She was clearly shaken and refused to touch the angel again. After asking her many questions, I looked at the angel again. To my complete shock, the bright red had turned darker with a slightly rough surface. I touched it, and it was dry. Nail polish stays smooth and bright even after it dries. This unnerved me, and I scraped the blood with my fingernail and flaked it off. I've seen coagulated blood before many times, and this red stuff was just like it. I gave the girl a look of seriousness as my mind started to swim. We spoke a bit longer, and she said she would like to be alone. I decided to place the angel on top of the entertainment center in the front room. The married couple were standing in the hallway watching me place the angel on the entertainment center. They were extremely doubtful too, even more so than I, because I believe I had made some logical deductions that they had not. I placed the angel gently on top of the center and began to walk towards the married couple. Now, I placed these pieces about a foot from the edge of the entertainment center. This I know, I did it purposely. About halfway to the married couple, I watched their faces turn to an expression of pure astonishment. They pointed behind me, and I looked back at the center. The angel pieces lay on the carpet in front of the entertainment center. I stood staring at the pieces in complete disbelief. The couple approached me and said that they did not see the pieces actually move from the center, but they saw them bounce on the carpet as I walked away. As we stood there, we all got a very eerie feeling that we were not alone. I sat on the couch and got a feeling of malevolence. I sat quietly and felt the presence of a very angry man in the room who was trying to scare me. I spoke out loud and told him I knew what he was up to and that it would not work with me and that he should leave. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a face of a man who had the most terrible scowl and angry eyes. I believe he was truly upset that I was not going to allow him to have that effect on me. The feeling of the room returned to normal, and I relaxed. I went back to the girl's room and told her what had just happened. She was crying and said that ever since she had been going out with this certain young man, who was very controlling and had lots of bottled emotions, a spirit of an angry man had been following her around. I suggested that she leave this boy and pray for the spirit to leave her alone. She ended up breaking up with him, but a few months after the incident. This story sounds incredibly generic, I know. I did not believe it myself, but I was there, and there was definitely something there that night that did not like us. Thanks for reading. One April morning, I had to go and meet a woman and take her to a doctor's visit and translate for her. We were to meet in front of the translating office. When I turned onto the street of the business, I noticed a minivan with 2 adults and a child in the middle of both adults, and I parked and approached the couple to ask if she was the woman that I had to go and help translate. The child and husband just looked at me and smiled as I spoke to this woman, and the child was just all jumpy and playful and all smiles. Cute 3-year-old boy with his thick blue jacket, dark brown hair, cute as can be. The woman then agreed to go in my vehicle and left her husband and child. At this point, I was unaware of who this child was. We continued in my vehicle towards the doctor's office, and she started to tell me more about her doctor's visit. This woman was diabetic and had lost already a baby at birth, and 2 had been miscarriages. All she wanted, she told me, was to have a baby. I thought, how strange. Then I asked her, and the little boy in the minivan, isn't he her son? She replied no. Then I asked if he was a relative, or maybe it was just babysitting for someone, and she was just looking at me kinda weird, like that what is she talking about look. I caught on and asked what was wrong, and she said that there was no boy in the minivan, just her and her husband. I was shocked and a little speechless, and said to her, now look, there was this little boy in the middle of you and your husband. He would look at me when you were talking to me, and he would smile and be playful. I even described him to her and what he was wearing, and she said no, that there was no child with them at all. You know, in the beginning, I thought that she was joking with me, but she was serious. So then I became serious and very thoughtful of why this occurred. Because sometimes you think now, I know I'm not that crazy, and I know I don't hallucinate, and I know I was not seeing things. I'm in my right state of mind, so what is going on? All I could tell her was that babies many times when they pass, they continue as angels to be by their parents' side. And that now she knew that her little guardian angel was this cute angelic brown-haired boy. Months passed, and she returned to the office and her husband was with her. And she told her, remember her? She's the one that saw her angel in her car. This happens to me often, that I see, feel, or even sense people or children that have passed. But at the time it is happening, I don't think they are past. I see them like I see anyone else. It is after that I know that I just saw someone that is deceased. Thanks for reading. Call me crazy, but as a teen, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned properties. There was a house just outside of town about a half-mile off of the city that intrigued me since childhood, and I had to go see it. One afternoon, two of my friends agreed that it would be a great place to check out, so we loaded up and went. It was a typical creepy old farmhouse type place, made of wood that had begun to rot decades ago, dirty, mostly broken windows, rickety porches, 2 stories high, plus an attic. Getting in was no problem. The doors were gone, so we just walked in. There was evidence of other people having been there, as the room we concluded to be, the living room, was full of empty beer cans and potato bag chips. Uninterested in these findings, we made our way into the kitchen. It was broad daylight outside, but this house was pretty dark inside, adding to the intrigue and creepiness. The kitchen was a wreck. It seemed as though the mice had taken full advantage of whatever had been left there, so on to the dining room. Finally, we saw a set of stairs, the first ones we had seen so far, and up we went. On the 3rd step from the top, I set my soda can down so we'd be able to remember that's where we came up. I'm glad I had the foresight to do that. We meandered to the top floor, and found that it was much brighter and warmer up there. Probably because it wasn't under the cover of the low tree branches as the downstairs had been. We weren't feeling too afraid, just a little uneasy, as we walked around until we got to a large room on the east side. I can't really explain what I felt. Mostly I felt as though I wanted to cry. Someone was very sad, and that much I could feel. Whoever it was hadn't been ready to die when they did, and weren't able to say goodbye and let go. My friend Chris left the room, stating that he was finding it difficult to breathe. Must be the dust. My friend Megan was very pale and shaking, so we decided okay, it's time to go. We walked around the top floor, looking for stairs to the attic, and never found them. We found a set going down, which we had missed on the first few go-arounds, so down we went. They led to the living room. How was that possible? We walked around the downstairs, peeking at all the little doors for stairs, only to find closets. There wasn't a door to get out of the living room, so we went back upstairs and walked around some more. Finally, Megan spotted the stairs where my soda can was, and we happily bounded down them and back into the dining room. We made our way around the downstairs again just to be sure. The dining room led to the back porch, and the kitchen had the stairs to go up. The kitchen only led to the dining room and the living room. The living room only led to the kitchen and the porches. Okay, so where were the stairs we walked down? This was the same room because the mess on the floor was the same, and the mantle above the fireplace was the same. So what was the deal here? We went back upstairs, and Megan stayed at the top of the stairs, while Chris and I walked around again in search of the mystery steps we had gone down. We never found them. As Chris and I were walking back towards Megan, I heard someone in the large bedroom that made me feel very sad. It sounded like a soft crying, and I felt very bad. I felt that we intruded into this person's life, and it was time we left, so we did. Most places we ever visited, we went back for a second and sometimes third look. However, this place, we didn't. We all felt after we left that maybe whoever was there really just wanted to be left alone, and we never went back together. The oddest thing is that on Easter Day of the following year, I had this unstoppable urge to go to the house and leave flowers on the porch. I got some daffodils and headed out there, only to find my friends Chris and Megan also had come to bring flowers. We all had that urge, and we all headed out there without the others knowing with a big bouquet of fresh daffodils. Something there touched each of us, and I will forever feel a connection to that house in the woods, and whoever that is who lives there in the large room on the east side of the upper floor who seems to like daffodils. Thanks for reading. First, I need to give you some background history. I can see auras. If you don't know what that is, it's the energy a body gives off. There are different colors, and those colors have meanings such as blue and green is relaxed. I started to see auras around the same time I had my experience. I was in 8th grade, at church, the first time I saw an aura. I can't see them as well now. It's been 6 years since I started, and my ability has faded from lack of use. My experience happened the same year, 8th grade, in French class. My teacher was working on the overhead, so she had all the lights off. I was sitting in the back of the class. French didn't excite me much, so I was not really paying attention to what she was saying. Instead, I was playing with the light around her. This is rather hard to explain. Her body was reflecting light from the overhead. I think I could see this because I could see auras. Anyway, I would stare at the light around her and move into the dark beside her. Kind of like when you would stare at a bright light for a while, and then when you would look away, you still see the light. Well, I could see the outline of her body, and then it would just fade away. I would then look back at my teacher and do this all over again. The point being, I was technically staring at nothing for a while. It was after doing this a couple of times that I noticed something else. It was a thin, blue outline of a person standing opposite my teacher, watching what she was writing on the overhead. I was looking at its side profile, and I could see a perfect outline of a nose, mouth, etc. I could only see it from the waist up because the desks were blocking the rest of my view. I froze when I noticed this thing. I couldn't stop staring. I thought I must be seeing things. When it turned towards me and started to approach me, it didn't walk, but came towards me in a flashing motion, like a strobe light was on. I freaked, all my muscles tensed, and I wanted to bolt, but was too frozen. That's when it stopped approaching me and just laughed at me. This is when it starts to get really weird. The laughter was inside my head, and I know it was not mine. It was cold and evil, and I was about to start crying. The rest of the class, it just watched my teacher and was smiling over my fear. Once class was over, I bolted from the room and told my friend what had happened. Nothing else happened for the rest of the day. When I got home, I told my mom what happened and said I was scared of going back to French class. She said if it happens again, I was to say a prayer and ask for God to protect me. The next day, I went back to school. French was my 3rd period class and math was my 1st. Sitting in math, I was miserable. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and I was scared. It was then that I hear the laughter again. My body tensed up again just like last time. That just made it laugh even more. I asked it inside my head, "What do you want?" It told me, and this is happening all inside my head, mind you, to torture you. I know I sound crazy talking with myself, but it was definitely not my voice I heard. It was deep and cold and very evil. I then said, "Fuck you. You have to give me a break." I was only 14 and not very mature yet. Right after I told it off, I got very sick to my stomach. I then apologized and took back my comment. The stomach pains went right away, and it started to laugh hard. It was feeding off of my fear and seemed to be gaining strength from it. As soon as math was over and I had to go to my 2nd period class, I found my friend who I'd talked to yesterday and told him I did not want to go to French class. He said he'd go to counseling center with me. 2nd period went by fine. When French time came, I had to go ask my teacher if it was okay for me to go to a counseling center. Well, as soon as I walked into the classroom, it felt like walking into a cloud of evil. All I wanted to do was get out of there. I started to cry while asking my teacher to leave, and the laughter started again. This time, it was echoing in my head. My poor teacher was trying to write out my slip as fast as possible so I could leave. I went to the counseling center with my friend, and the two of us sat alone in a small computer room. We just sat there. There was nothing else to do. I could feel it in the room somewhere with me, enjoying my pain. Without really thinking about it, I thought to myself, "Oh God, help me." Right at the instant, I heard a scream, and I could feel that someone else was there. I turned to my friend and told him, then a teacher came in and said we had to go back to class. I didn't know what was happening, but by the time I had walked across the commons to my French class, I was in a box. That's the only way I can explain it. I felt like I was in a box, and it was scratching from the outside to get in. While inside my box, I was feeling safety, good, and peace. I heard a voice that told me over and over, "You're safe now. Nothing's going to get you." I couldn't stop smiling. I felt so good. As the day went on, my box got bigger. It grew to the size of the school, and then so big I couldn't even feel its boundaries, but I knew I was still inside. I talked with the spirit for 2 days. It told me I would always be safe, and it was a messenger from God. I believe it was my guardian angel. Look, I know this story sounds crazy, and I've tried my best to believe I had an overactive imagination, but it was too real to not be true. The voices, the things happening around my classroom, things that are happening in general. I just couldn't fathom what was going on. And I know, it's disbelievable, like I said, but still, in my head, I know it was real. Hey guys, of course, Phantom is back with the compilation, of course. I really hope you enjoyed it. It was very cinematic as my cat is blocking my freaking mic, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for all your support, guys. Go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe. I really feel like these collection of stories are actually the best ones I've done in the past month or so, so I decided to put them all in a compilation and deliver them to you guys. As you guys know, obviously I'm no stranger to, not being a fan of compilations, so this was more of a compilation video for you guys. I don't know going forward if I'm going to be doing it that much, but I just wanted to say also that I tried to make it as cinematic as possible, so you got a bunch of stock footage in here. So completely brand new footage that I haven't used before that I think would be really perfect for this video. And I tried to make it like a movie almost, so hopefully you enjoyed that aspect of the video. And if you did, don't forget to like I said, because, it's important. And if you haven't seen my newest video that I came out with on Thursday, instead of Friday, I released a video on Thursday, so you want to check that out. And this will be my third upload of the week, so you guys are actually getting extra. And it's kind of funny because I figured it wouldn't take me as long to do a video like this, but compilations always seem to surprise me as, they actually took me 5 hours this time to make this compilation. So I don't know what's going through my head. I just want to make you guys happy and be the best narrator that I can possibly be, best content creator. So you guys, I'm getting really passionate. I'm getting aggressive passionate. You know what I mean? Like aggressive, like I want to hug you with, all my might, aggressive hugs, but not so much that I'll squeeze you to death. I don't want to do that because I love you guys. But anyway, guys, I just needed something funny to say. So I just said that, But good night, good morning, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.